installment of the StartWell Podcast. This time around, I'm in studio with Goel.
Goel.
Yeah. The founder of Fresh City Farms, who is here to tell us about life on the range and other fun stuff. Actually, not life on the range. But yeah, Fresh City Farms. I break it down for our audience. Like, what is Fresh City Farms? Let's start there.
Fresh City is a company based here in the wonderful city of Toronto. We farm, so we have an urban farm, apparently Canada's largest, based in Downsview Park in the kind of northwestern corner of the city. And then we deliver what we grow and what other farmers grow to households across the city.
Mm-hmm.
And we also operate 8 retail stores in central part of Toronto. Big focus on organic, sustainable, seasonal, fresh food.
Now, it's not just grocery stores that you guys run.
No, it's we basically are here to create a better life through food. And so for us, the way we've chosen to interpret that is help the consumer get access to food that is meticulously sourced.
Right.
So of course means organic local produce in our early days, but has now evolved to sourdough bread made from organic flour, 100% grass-fed beef that we butcher in-house, prepared foods that are organic and local, packaged in jars that you can return, so circular economy way of thinking. So really connect all those kind of dots together, because often, you know, we as consumers, you'll read about farm to table and organic and local, and it's often not that accessible for the average person.
Yeah, it's interesting because that's definitely something I've heard from a few people is, I mean, in big cities especially, also there's an added price point to things being local because, you know, gas... No, it's got nothing to do with transport. It's funnily enough, transport globally is like cheap.
It is. Especially if you're bringing things in by ship.
Yeah.
It's not. People often talk about, you know, the food's coming in from 10,000 miles away, and actually that's not a cost issue. That might be an environmental issue, but it doesn't cost all that much.
Can I ask you a few things about groceries that come from afar?
Please.
Okay, avocados. I know it's a big hot topic. Avocados. People love them on toast.
They love them on toast.
But I don't understand how an avocado can get to me from Mexico and be perfectly about to be ripe.
Oh, I mean, if you think about it, the trip from Mexico or Ecuador or wherever they would come from isn't that far. It's like 2, 3, 4 days by truck. And as long as they're picked at the right time, timing's not an issue. And similarly with things like bananas, I mean, even you have apples and citrus and stuff coming from Africa and New Zealand and
South
Chile.
Africa has really grown its exports.
Huge. So yeah, for a lot of, you know, outside of things like, say, raspberries or blueberries that, you know, depending on where they come from, they have to be flown in, which we, Fresh City, shy away from. You can get food here pretty quickly. I mean, the cold supply chain is pretty well developed now in terms of distributors and obviously trucking companies having, you know, refrigerated fleets.
Right.
So it's pretty seamless. I mean, the problem often comes if there's problems at the border or problems with weather that prevent, you know, traffic from flowing.
Customs officials stealing bananas and things.
All the time.
I hear about the, you know, the narcotics, you know, being seized, but they don't ever stop the bananas. So I wonder about this. Okay, so like the idea is that, you know, shipping is becoming easier or has become very easy, and refrigeration's there, and so the produce doesn't spoil on the way, and economies of scale enable people to provide, you know, summer fruits in winter and so on. Tell me a little bit more about Fresh City Farms' beginning, because I really find it interesting that you've gone from kind of, in my mind, urban farmers, that may have been an experiment, with the aim of getting to where you are now, but to grocers. So that transition, Did it feel like it? Does it feel like it happened overnight? Was it pre-calculated?
Some of it was, most of it wasn't. Meaning, when we first started, my thinking was, okay, I want to create an urban farm. And I realized from the get-go, in order to make the economics work, we need to deliver directly to the customer or sell directly to the customer, because there's no way Loblaws is going to buy from the half-acre plot that we have at Downsview at any
37 potatoes.
Yeah, exactly. At 10 cents on the dollar if we're lucky. So that was baked in, realizing it had to be B2C, and that meant that our offering had to be wider than just what we grew, right? Because we only grow so many things at one time, but you want avocados and you want bananas that don't grow in Canada. So that part of it was always there, that we would need to source broader than just what we grew. But the idea of doing full grocery was a bit of a realization that, hey, people would not buy from us consistently if we're not providing them with most of their fresh basket. And I'd say today, all of their fresh basket. Because otherwise they'll just end up going to Loblaws or to Sobeys. Do
people generally stock their fridge the same way every week?
Yeah, most people are very consistent. I mean, we're 85% of our basket is fresh. So, we're not the place you go to get your 5 kilogram, sack of quinoa or something like that.
It's a lot of quinoa.
That's a lot. Well, some people.
They love that quinoa.
So it's really fresh focused. It really is fresh focused. And that's, a pretty high velocity item. So you'll have people, one of the big debates that we had as a group when we decided to go into retail, because we were online for the first 7 years.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
Yeah.
What years were those?
2011 to 2018. Yeah. So we got into retail fairly recently. Basically, we opened our first store in Ossington in September of 2018.
And your online sales, how did it go? Because it's kind of, you had what you had from the harvest.
Yeah.
So what did that mean for the way that you published the items for sale and the way that people bought them?
Going into retail, you mean?
No, online. Even online. Were people disappointed that they didn't get potatoes because they sold out that day? Was there an auction? How did you sell it?
No, what we ended up doing is essentially, having, for most items, except for some seasonal things like rhubarb or asparagus or garlic scapes, most of them is always available. And so that, for example, we would say, okay, we would sell all the potatoes out from our farm, and if, ours ran out, we'd buy from another farm.
Okay.
And that's kind of, when I started the business, it was very romanticized. We have these what are called CSA boxes, community shared agriculture, where the main idea is you come to us at the beginning of the season, you give the farmer $500 for a share.
Right.
And then, whatever we harvest is divided up between how many shares. So we have 50 people who've signed up for this, and we, give you whatever is in being harvested. But quickly realized, that's for like that 0.1% hardcore, ecologically minded consumer.
Mm-hmm.
For mere mortals like most of us, that's not going to fly.
Right.
And you want the ability to customize. You don't want to prepay. You want your potatoes when you want your potatoes or your strawberries. So we realized we needed to be more flexible there, and that's the where ideals meet reality. Sometimes you have to figure out how to modulate between the two, and kind of where we are is the result of that.
It's super interesting, especially because where you've gone with the retail, at least in terms of the customer experience, is very I would say it's a very quality experience that people have when they go to Fresh City Farms. It doesn't feel like, I guess let's put the question on you. When you guys were kind of starting to go into the grocery business 3 years ago, yeah. How did you go about setting up the first store? Was it a big process where you hired designers and interior, branding people and do the full nine? Or was it a kind of a team-led effort to figure out the best approach to formalizing or physicalizing the experience?
Mostly was team-led, so we definitely pulled in professionals here and there, but the biggest question, or two biggest question, is where will your first store be? And we ended up deciding to say, let's put our first store where most of our customers are, where our most active subscribers are. And so our first store in Ossington was actually smack in the middle of our best postal code.
Oh, wait. So Ossington Avenue was the first store?
Yeah.
Ah,
Yeah, and that's our best kind of postal code in terms of penetration of how many people buy.
man, that was only like 3 years ago.
That was just 3 years ago. Well, what is it? 2018. So that 3.5 now, I guess. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Time does move.
We're getting old.
Quite
As old as your
fast.
daughter.
Yeah, 3.5. That is crazy to think because the brand has also grown in its equity in the downtown core, I feel like. When I mention Fresh City Farms to people, they know what it is.
I think downtown we have really good brand recognition at this point. Between the stores, we've been around for about 10, 11 years now. We've had a couple pop-up things. We do a lot of consumer shows, a lot of advertising. So I think in the downtown core, the recognition is pretty good. I think in the inner suburbs, outer suburbs, different story. But say south of Eglinton or whatnot, between the two rivers, recognition is pretty good.
Between the two rivers.
Yeah.
That could be a show. A wonderful show that airs at 2:30 in the afternoon. Prime nap time. Between the two rivers. Wait, what rivers are you talking about, man?
The Don and the Humber.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's where Toronto is.
For me, it is, at least. So, for us, we're always looking. How the city's divided up is really important for a company that does delivery.
Right.
So we often think of like, okay, so where are we delivering 7 days a week? Where do we do time slots? So, and sometimes those topographical features are what divides key parts of the city.
So you guys do your own delivery.
We do.
You own the fleet.
Yeah.
What does that look like, and how has that part of the business changed in the last couple of years with the pandemic?
We deliver currently on a next day basis.
Mm-hmm.
And the benefit of that for the planet and for us is that we can plan ahead and you can create fairly dense routes. So each of our vans does like 50 or 60 deliveries per run. So it's vans that are refrigerated. Driver comes in the morning, picks up their orders and goes to deliver it. And so the great thing about that, it gives us complete control over the cold chain. We know, it's dropped off at the customer's door. There's a photo taken. We know where it's left and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So that's huge. During the pandemic, it was a bit of a gong show, honestly, because what happened was demand spiked up.
Like immediately, overnight.
Literally overnight. But the lucky thing for us is, again, my grandmother always used to say, you're better lucky than wise. The lucky thing for us is we'd always had a contactless delivery system, meaning we would leave the box or bag at somebody's door. We'd have some dry ice and ice in there so it can stay there for a few hours.
That was like when I was a paper boy.
Exactly. But
when I was a paper boy, it was contactless delivery. You just chuck it at the front door.
Oh, you were one of those guys. See, I was a paper guy that delivered right to the porch.
We made like half a cent per delivery. It was tough times, man. You had to move fast.
That was tough. Yeah, I think I had a route, 126 houses. I won't forget it.
Wow.
But the lucky thing for us was that was already built into our model because that's what enabled us to do deliveries efficiently, right?
Right.
We were able to, you have to knock on the door and wait for somebody to answer, and they're not there, and then you call them. We always just dropped it off and moved on.
Mm-hmm.
So during the pandemic, we had a ton of experience doing that already, and we ended up partnering with a few businesses that were effectively shuttered that had fleets to do delivery. So
wow.
Catering company did one. One was like a home improvement a business that was like completely shuttered. So there was in the first 2 or 3 months there, that's how we kind of built. And then once numbers kind of regularized, we did it all in-house again.
Interesting. It's super interesting because so many businesses have been born in quote unquote logistics in the last couple of years. I'm sure you guys have been approached by so many people saying, hey, you should use us for your delivery. Has anyone tried to sell you their services?
A ton of people, yeah.
And there's so many, like we get calls and it's like, I don't have anything to deliver. Bring people to me.
Right. Deliver customers here.
It's so funny. But owning your own supply chain, to the end, to the last mile is really fascinating because there's a lot of logistics that you guys own.
You know what? Like for the businesses of our nature, unless you're doing kind of Uber style delivery, like one order at a time from the store, it goes with the territory, to be honest. Because if you think of one of our deliveries, you have ambient items, you have refrigerated items, and you have frozen items.
Right.
So there's not much leeway there for things to go wrong, for timing to be off. And often it's, the time when we finish packing sometimes is a bit variable depending on when the cold pressed juice comes in or when the bread's ready and things like that. So it's hard to get that all done unless you have control over it. I think if you're doing something like, it's shelf stable, and if they come 3 hours later or 2 hours before, it doesn't matter as much. But that's where you see most online grocers who do online grocery as opposed to just delivery from the store, one by one. They take it in-house.
Yeah, it's funny because a few episodes ago, I was here talking to John and Eric from Ascari. And they were, they did the same thing with their food delivery and their catering business now that's kind of grown. Is since day one, they were like, we need to own the delivery pipeline. And some of the orders that we had early on for some meetings that we had in the pandemic here, which were very small meetings, but they came a bit late, and they were missing one package and stuff. And then they were like, "Oh, Joe," because it was just one guy with a van. And I don't know if they've kept that guy on, because I see an Ascari branded van on Christie Street like every day, and it's just parked in the same place. So I'm like, hey, go to work, do your thing. You're always at home. But they've grown since, and they've become very, very efficient at like getting large orders now that we're handling here on time. And a big part of it, they've told me, has been that they don't need to rely on someone else. They can correction curve if they have to, with that guy who's apparently
on Christie,
maybe not working with them anymore. Parked his van outside. They're getting free advertising.
No, the logistics part of it is, and that's one of the things I think we're missing in the conversation in the convenience economy, is that there is a big price to be had for getting what you want when you want it within half an hour, which is kind of like, where the market's going. And it has an impact on the kind of business that can execute on that. It has to be pretty damn big, because you need to have, like Uber kind of network to be able to tap into. And B, it has a huge planetary impact, because suddenly you're doing one shot at a time. You're
right,
not
very
running
inefficient
optimized routes like we are.
Yeah, super inefficient.
Yeah.
There's packaging. There's like the cars. Well, there's so many. Pollution. So many inefficiencies.
I mean, the way we do it, in vast majority of scenarios, decreases carbon emissions. So, for example, if we're delivering in a typical inner suburban or suburban area and we're doing 60 drops, that's 60 trips that people haven't had to make back and forth with their 4,000-pound SUV to Costco or to Walmart. And so that's like a net savings. But yeah, when you're just, if somebody's in Vaughan and they're ordering from the closest Loblaws through Instacart, that's a lot of carbon. That's like somebody driving back and forth, just for your order.
And who knows where the cardboard goes. That's a different matter. That's an Amazon stab.
Yeah.
Where does it go? They've improved it. At least it like flat packs very easily.
It is a bit better now, yeah.
A bit better.
Yeah.
It just falls apart.
And you don't get as big of packages as you used to.
Yeah. Although we still, I don't know, once in a while we have like paper towels, kitchen towels come to the house, and it's like the only thing in a box this big.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's very strange. We put my daughter in it and drag her around the house. Yeah, it's been very interesting to see. We were talking earlier, right, about this idea of like trend spotting, and you kind of almost can't spot trends in consumer demand in the last little while with the pandemic and with lockdown orders in place in Ontario and stuff like that. But have you seen a return to retail? Like, are people kind of like pedestrian traffic walking into the shops a little bit more?
For us, it's a bit of a mixed bag, to be honest. So so we have 8 stores, 4 of which are bakeries under the Mabel's brand. And those, basically went back to normal, and probably then some, back after the first lockdown ended. And they've been pretty consistent there. On the grocery side, it's been a bit of a mixed bag, partly because of the location of a couple of stores close to offices, which are not opened right now. So definitely less traffic from that. And partly because of this phenomenon of people are generally, during the pandemic, insofar as they went grocery shopping, not online, they went to bigger stores so they can do their whole shop at once.
Okay.
And that's kind of hurt us to a certain extent, because ours is small format, like very fresh based. So if you're looking for a full shop, you typically go elsewhere.
Okay.
So net, it's been, I'd say, neutral, but it really depends on which store format.
Okay, so the company grows from being an experimental kind of farm, urban farm,
Yeah.
into a grocery. Along the way, picks up a butchery and bakery brands.
Yeah.
Where do those come from? Were those started by you guys?
No, those
You
were
bought them?
both long-standing brands in Toronto. So Mabel's was started in 2007.
So who's Mabel?
Mabel is the niece of the founder,
Ah.
one of the founders. Yes,
Who like cookies very much?
like cookies and croissants and all the good stuff. Yeah.
Okay, so the idea is that the foundation story, that it was like named after you said niece?
The niece, yeah.
The niece who loved these baked goods, and so.
I'm not sure if there was a connection whether she loved them or not.
Okay.
So that I'm not sure about, but I know that's the.
And
that's
who's the
connection.
Healthy Butcher?
Healthy Butcher was founded by a husband and wife, Mario and Tara, back in 2004, 2005, with an eye to, they were kind of lapsed vegetarians looking for better for you meat or better source meat.
Happy cows.
Happy cows with, no hormones and no, who spend time on grass rather than grain. And they came up with the Healthy Butcher. So they opened their first store close by here on Queen Street.
Yeah, I remember that back in the day.
Still
That's
there.
quite a while ago, right?
Still there, yeah.
Yeah.
They're amongst all the weed shops, so you can
Oh my God.
get good meat and good weed in the same shopping trip.
Doesn't make sense. All the weed shops on Queen Street.
There's a lot.
It's too many.
It's time to consolidate.
Honestly.
Yeah.
It's like they're all they're burning through their seed capital, and maybe they raise 1-2 years of lease money or something. But it makes no sense. That whole sector.
It makes no sense. I mean, unless they're expecting a whole bunch of marijuana tourism, which is obviously not going to happen anytime soon.
Nope.
I don't see.
Through VR
Yeah,
on Meta, Facebook Meta.
Mark
You go weed shopping in
Mark
Toronto.
will save us. There you go.
They'll email you the weed. It's very interesting as a sojourn a little bit away from this groceries topic is on the farming tip, right? We'll maybe talk about weed again in a second, but what have you seen in the last few years with the availability of produce locally? Any trends in what people are growing to start with?
I guess maybe a step back for a second. There's a lot of talk about local produce. I will say in the mainstream grocery world, I don't think it's made a real dent.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's been, they highlight when it is local, but it's not like, I think as a percentage
No
of
one's
sales.
seeking it out particularly?
Not that nobody's seeking it out, but I think the nature of the industry right now is not to actually change how they source. It's just to kind of greenwash a bit and say, hey, look at this cool local item we have and Farmer John who grew it.
Yeah.
But not necessarily to say, hey, let's invest in Canadian farming.
Because then the garlic wouldn't be $25 for 3 bulbs.
And from China. So that's, I think, one part of it. The other part of it, I mean, certainly in our niche, you're seeing people more appreciative of local food. They're learning about parts of the plant that they didn't use before, plants that they didn't even eat before. And that's cool to see. But I'm very cognizant that, we're a specialty grocer attracting a certain kind of customer, and they're very interested in this kind of stuff. So I will say there is a budding sense of terroir emerging in Southern Ontario as people think about where their food comes from. And I think the food knowledge is becoming more and more textured. Like, if you go to France and hear any French person talk about wax poetic, about farming and food, it's a very different ball game here.
Right.
But that's emerging. I think that's emerging. You're seeing, people, go to Prince Edward County and appreciate the wineries and the, where we grow apples in this province and where we grow carrots in this province. So I do think you're seeing, a much more educated consumer emerging.
Right. And then on the producer side, though, are you seeing, I guess, okay, so here's a question, right? We're also talking about this idea of kind of like, maybe we're hinting at it earlier, urban flight and, people looking for purpose in their lives and maybe, the pandemic pushing people into kind of different career paths and so on. Is it plausible or likely that you'll see more people turn to working the earth for a living?
I don't think so.
So is this a problem with the immediate future of our locally sourced food in Ontario? Like the big question being, is Joe the 65-year-old soon to retire farmer or 75-year-old, because people work long when they're happy. But are they going to have any legacy plan? Are farms going to go become B&Bs?
Well, this is a big issue, right? Is that the average age of farmers in Ontario are like late 50s. And I think the thing to keep in mind is, I'm a student of economics. I don't think we're going back in time. We're not going to go back in time to a place where agriculture is less mechanized or less irrigated or less sophisticated, if you will. But I think what we should be striving for, and you're seeing a bit of that, is thinking about our land as a non-renewable resource, as opposed to another place where we can pave over and build more cookie-cutter suburban homes and really wide boulevards. So my hope certainly is that it's not so much that more people will farm, but the land that we do farm, that we do have, we A, maintain it and keep it and preserve it, and B, that it's farmed sustainably. And that can mean a lot of things. It can mean more intensive production, like greenhouse production, for example, which can use, if done right, use less water, much less pesticides, and be more productive. It can mean land that's used in a more appropriate way in terms of using cover crops so there isn't soil erosion, et cetera, and much less or no pesticides. So it's not so much that I think we're going to have this, at least my utopia, or at least realistic version of utopia, given where we are today, is not that there's going to be a whole bunch more homesteaders, essentially. I think that's going to be a fringe phenomenon, and one I welcome, don't get me wrong, but I don't think it's going to be this, where 20% of us are going to be feeding ourselves from in the near term.
It's interesting. With farmers retiring out, there is that question, right, of all these wonderful producing farms and whether they'll get, amalgamated by private equity-backed, farming behemoths.
Yeah.
Or grow other products like weed. That seems to be like we're farming too much weed anyway, and it's not making anyone rich. So I don't know if that's the answer. But it would be sad if fields go to waste.
Oh, for sure.
In the next 5-10 years.
For sure. I mean, I will say there's probably, if you look at Southern Ontario, people are always surprised to hear this, but we have some of the best land in the world in terms of farmland.
Like fertile,
right climate, enough water, like all this stuff that makes a piece of land very commercially viable as a farm. But we don't necessarily think of it as this resource that it really is, that this thing, because once you pave it over, it's done, right? So I think what we're missing in Ontario is really a land use policy, agricultural land use policy that's effective. The green belt offers a bit of that, in the sense that you cannot develop in the green belt or within certain restrictions, but we don't see it nearly enough as a national treasure that it is.
Yeah, Canada's a bit weird, man. It's weird for so many reasons.
Oh, yeah. I come from I'm from Israel, a very small country. So, the sense of how every piece of land there is obviously very contested. But here, if you drive, but people forget, I think, if you drive, say, 3 or 4 hours out of Toronto in any direction, that's half of the best farmland in Canada. That's it. So this rest of this huge country, it's great, but it's not very farmable.
Yeah, wheat.
Yeah.
So it's wheat.
And even that is not, it's only certain areas. Like most of Canada
Shitty
cannot
wheat.
be farmed.
It's either wheat or shitty wheat.
Why?
That wheat tastes like shit. I don't want to eat that.
Wheat or wheat. That's all we got.
Yeah, wheat or wheat. Oh my God. And then the mountains.
So we got to get our act together on land. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's very interesting. And the idea of stewardship, promoting stewardship of the land amongst urban dwellers, which is like what percentage, massive majority percentage of Canadians are urban dwellers, right? Or suburban dwellers, as you were alluding to. So I think like promoting young Canadians to have experiences with the land and promote this idea of kind of stewardship and taking interest is difficult.
Yeah.
It's not something that is done by the private sector alone, for sure.
No.
And no. I have no idea how the education systems in the provinces deal with that. Taking the kids out to a farm, do they do that?
I'll give you an example. In Quebec, if you're a farmer, the government provides funding for therapy for farmers, like mental health therapy, free or subsidized. If you're trying to start a farm, they're going to subsidize building out your irrigation system and your greenhouses.
Wow, they'll get you started.
They'll get you started.
That's amazing.
We don't have that in Ontario. Nothing
For
even
anything.
close to that.
Wow.
Nothing even close to that.
And province to province agricultural output. I don't know how you would measure that as a per capita production volume across the board of all products or something. Like, how do they compare?
Well, Quebec has become a bit of a powerhouse now in
Really?
both, I mean, agricultural products in terms of the raw materials, but also even more importantly in processed as well. Like they're building champions in dairy and cheese, greenhouse technology. So Quebec has always been, much more at the forefront of industrial policy than we have in Ontario. Sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. Obviously, there's been some big failures, like SNC and Bombardier to a certain extent. But there's also been big successes that people don't talk about. It's smaller, but big successes as well. And I think their perspective in agriculture, to your point, has more of a stewardship lens on it than we think here in Ontario.
Yeah, it's also interesting because I think Quebecers with a long-standing history of being Quebecers, which a lot of native Quebecers are. They have roots going back maybe not to the 1600s, but maybe 100 or 200 years longer than Ontarians, it seems like.
Yeah.
That might be a thing. You have your kind of heritage village or place in the province where you're from. And so you remember that culturally, if not through your father or whatever.
Yeah, agreed.
So that's an interesting thing. But I do see hope, perhaps, in trends like you mentioned, like Prince Edward County becoming a weekend getaway for Torontonians. It's so funny how that happened, by the way, in the last few years, And it comes up every day. I think, when was it? On Monday, I was asking someone, I saw them in the office, and I said, hey, how was your weekend? And he said, oh, it was great, A friend of mine just bought a house in Prince Edward County. It has 8 bedrooms. Wow. We were all there just drinking all weekend.
Drinking cider.
Yeah, exactly. Nothing from the land around the house. I was so surprised. No, I wasn't surprised because I know this is happening now, right? Because it's like an inkling little. It's not a great business, but I've always wanted to do a couple things. I've always wanted to own a hotel, or at least one hotel, and I've always wanted to own and operate a vineyard.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and do the two together. So it's fun for me once in a while to look at what's available in the county.
Right.
And for years, I've made that one of my kind of realtor.ca, my MLS,
searches.
Weekend crushes, right? Yeah.
That's awesome.
I gave up on Toronto after I realized we can never afford to leave our house and buy a different house because it's just, the property prices are crazy. But so I started looking more at this stuff, and a lot of people seem to have had a hard go. I mean, it's difficult to grow wine. Maybe other produce.
Oh, yeah. That's you don't do that as a business. I mean, maybe the hotel part you do as a business, but not the vineyard.
But burying vines, the whole production technique here, it's crazy. And I hate saying this, and I'm not insulting, local producers across the board, but you have so many people growing grapes with all these arduous methods to keep them alive. And then they produce just swill. It's not good. It's terrible. A lot of it is terrible. Like in Niagara, a lot of the wine in Niagara, and still to this day, is mixed with foreign imported grapes.
Yeah.
And then you kind of wonder, why do you do it? Like, I don't understand.
Well, it depends which. So I mean, we just started selling wine in the last few months when the pandemic allowed that from a regulatory perspective. So, and we have a sommelier on staff now as well. So, I mean, there's some great whites in Ontario from Prince Edward County and Niagara, and a couple of choice reds as well.
But Pinots, right?
Yeah, exactly. But it's the climate here is its own climate, right? Mm-hmm. And frankly, I mean, that's kind of part of the whole terroir discussion, right? There is even within Ontario, certain areas that are better for certain crops than others.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, in and of itself a realization, right? That we're not going to grow a good
pineapple.
We can definitely not grow a pineapple.
Those coconuts won't grow.
So it's realizing that you can't do everything everywhere, right? And there's a beauty to that, right? And there's
is
a beauty to realizing, hey, these apples from Durham are phenomenal because of the climate there, but maybe a Cab Sav, not so much.
I think it's awesome, man. This idea of kind of like a return to in real life being, knowing what's actually happening around you.
Yeah.
I have this whole thing of like even, I'm a big student of kind of built environments, and the idea of, and obviously interior design and architecture in the business that I'm in, but looking at how people who have always grown up in cities have superimposed subconsciously perhaps a kind of aesthetics of nature onto the built environment around them, right? Where the tall buildings are the trees and so on. And it kind of like feeds this reprogrammed identity that kind of packages everything ready for commercial consumption and takes people away from their relationship to the things that they're consuming, and removes the possibility of even that connection being there.
Yeah.
A lot of people I've talked to who become vegetarian, vegan, whatever, and have this meat awakening. Often cases maybe they don't even have the option to have grass-fed, beautiful, happy cows. So they realize the horrors of the mass industrial complex producing cut packaged portion meats for them, and they don't want to be part of it. But can you imagine that realization when you have no alternative? It's got to be a little heart-wrenching.
Oh yeah. Listen, there's a lot of, one of the things that came up, I think, for us in a very big way during the pandemic is food insecurity. And not that it predates the pandemic easily, but the pandemic made it worse in many cases. And you realize this huge kind of gulf. And, the thing I always go back to is, come shop at Fresh City. I think we provide way better sourced food for your health and the planet than anywhere else. Go to your farmer's market, grow your own food. But at the end of the day, you got to make the transition from being a consumer to being a citizen, because this stuff is like, it's macro. It's not a self-righteous affair that, oh yeah, I'm eating organic and I'm eating local, so I'm doing my bit.
Exactly.
That's the, I wouldn't say a tip of the iceberg, but a small part of what the change ultimately needs to be.
The difficult thing in Canada, I find, is, and of course it's elsewhere, but my lens, being someone who's kind of like grown up between East Africa, done business in India, Canada, we're a nation of recyclers. I tell people, I don't mean that we're entirely pathetic, like kind of apathetic, people, but we do have a tendency to want to do good and choose easy ways to do good and then feel better about ourselves for it.
Yeah.
Because we also are all of the same milieu, it feels like predominantly middle class, with shelter and so on, majoritively in Canada. There's definitely people on the fridges, the 1% and the unfortunate people who don't have shelter and so on. But what I see, this is a great paradox, is we're a nation of recyclers and we do really a great job of separating different things to put in different bins. And one of the biggest breaking stories, of course, on the CBC, and other national outlets and smaller regional outlets in the news before the pandemic hit, literally, I believe it was about a month before the pandemic hit, was how all of that stuff just mostly goes to the Philippines and gets burned.
Yeah.
Or wherever, and just gets put in the ground or burned. And it was like 80% of all Canadian waste is like, is just the same as putting it in the trash bin.
Yeah, exactly.
Sold down to Mexico. And it's this great paradox, right? Like everyone likes kind of feeling good about doing the right thing, but if the system that gives them access to doing the right thing is fallible, they will still put faith in the system and want to hold the owners of the system's architecture accountable, or its key holders, and say, well, I did my bit and you didn't do your bit. And it's all about, well, everyone doing their bit. But the thing is a little bit more organic, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And people need to kind of take a little bit more responsibility for understanding things and learning things. And that's where also this urban farming thing is fascinating to me, because I think you give people the experience through urban farming to connect with the earth in ways that until they do for the first time, they might never have had the opportunity their whole lives, right?
I mean, that, if I think of urban farming, what it means to me, and this is always the case, by the way, from day one, I see it as this like platform to generate eureka moments, to get people thinking about what they're eating and what they're consuming in their life. Because ultimately, I think that's what everything we're talking about is. It sounds nebulous, but it's about consciousness, and it's about how we view the act of consumption and how we view what is a worthy life to live. Because if you're looking for all these placebos like recycling or like eco this packaging and slightly better source this, somebody's going to market that to you, right? And it might be your municipality, or it might be corporations who are going to market this.
Look at all those labels on fish, right?
Exactly, right. But I think if we just simplify our lives, at least insofar as eating food, eat more real food, eat a bit more locally, don't be fanatical about it, eat less meat, eat less processed food. It's all pretty simple, but I think you need to like understand like the consciousness part of it, like where you have to feel it rather than think it at a certain level. And that to me is what the promise of urban farming, where it can help. It's not that we're going to suddenly grow 10% of our food, and it's not because we save X amount of carbon emissions from not schlepping it from out of town or from Mexico. It's that it really gets people thinking. They're like, oh yeah, this is where my food comes from. This is how every pepper starts, and this is what it means to work the land and to harvest it, and this is how great it tastes and how good it smells. Just get people thinking about that. It's just simplifying.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's so cool. Like for the first, I feel shameful saying this, right? We've had a house for, before that I was in an apartment with no land around me. But I think it's been 6 years I've had this house. And, our back garden has always been a nightmare for some reason. Unfortunately, the house was pre-built when we bought it. I mean, which is good because we didn't have to deal with the century home falling apart. But they didn't care about the gardening side of it.
Right.
They just were focused on the house and dumping it on someone. And we got it dumped on us in a way. And the backyard was literally like pebbles and rocks, and like it was just the worst earth that you could find. I don't know where they got it from. They probably dug out the back of the house and just like left all that
debris afterwards. Yeah.
And it costs so much, and it's such an effort to redo all of that. So it's taken a number of years of me doing hard work to clean it up and then get it leveled and then put some nice new turf on. And in the process, I put a planter a couple of years ago around the perimeter of the garden, put some new topsoil and everything this year. And for the first time this year, planted some tomatoes and some herbs and some eggplants, and then a few leafy greens that didn't taste that great. It was Sukumawiki.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So in Kenya, in Swahili, we call it Sukumawiki, but what is that called? Collard greens?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Collard greens. Yeah. So in Kenya, that's the number one staple, or one of, there's a dish in Kenya that everyone has, which is ugali and Sukumawiki. So ugali is your kind of starchy mass, which is cornmeal.
Right.
And then the sukuma is like really tough collard greens, right? They cook it like crazy with some cilantro and some onions and garlic, a little bit of cumin, a little bit of turmeric, salt, pepper to taste, and some chilies. And it's sauteed, and then you eat the two together. And that's like the number one meal that people have all the time.
Oh, wow.
All the time.
Huh.
And maybe you put meat. It's a celebratory moment and you've killed a goat, you barbecue it, and they call it nyama choma, and then you eat it with your ugali and Sukumawiki.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, so I grew some Sukumawiki. It was a throwback Kenya moment. And it was fascinating because not so much for me, the eureka moment of that was not so much to go through the process. Part of it was, and feel the shame of not having done it all the time every summer because it's so easy.
Yeah.
Things just grow. Like they just grow, right?
Yeah.
And everyone's very surprised by this. What was really interesting, the eureka moment for me was not that though, was seeing other people's faces when they came over and saw, and we were encouraging them to like pick a tomato and like, hey, choose a tomato, just eat it. Like, what do you mean eat a tomato? Should we make a salad? No, just eat a tomato. Choose a little tiny one. Try it. And then my daughter is like showing them the little baby tomatoes and say, take this one, take this one.
Oh, it's awesome.
And people are surprised. Firstly, they feel like empowered to be able to eat something. Secondly, they don't know if it's safe because it's like in a backyard.
Yeah.
And it's like there is so much rethinking and reformatting going on in people's brains, which is just amazing. We do need that, a lot more of that for sure.
I think so.
How are restaurants relating to that?
I think restaurants are in a tough place, to be honest with you. I mean, obviously pandemic, but the reality of it is the average consumer, it's tough to get that message across, I think, in a restaurant setting. So you look at the vast majority of restaurants, 99.9% or whatever, it's completely conventional supply chain.
Right.
You're not seeing, you have your odd farm to table restaurant, maybe one or two ingredients at some restaurants that are, directly from local farms. But for the most part, it's very, very, it's actually, I find it intriguing from a marketing economics perspective that the penetration you're seeing for, say, local or organic at the grocery store, it's fairly low, but it's there. It's like there's a market and there's an offering. And restaurants, very, very small. Like you really need to dig if you are looking to have a meal at a restaurant that is locally, organically sourced, or either or.
Yeah, it's a shame. It'd be kind of cool. Also, with real estate being the price that it is, it's a difficult racket in general for restaurateurs to do their deals. So they have to find margin wherever they can get it.
Oh yeah, no blame. Honestly, it is what it is. Ultimately, I think it's just hard to translate that to the customer. And to be frank, it's, I think, ultimately easier it's easier to do a bit of tokenism here and there and say, these are organic eggs or farm fresh eggs, but the rest of the menu is just conventional because that's enough for most people. Most people aren't going to dig much deeper than that.
It's branding.
Whereas I think when you're shopping yourself, especially, there's moments of transformation for people. Often we find, people start shopping with us when they're thinking of getting pregnant or having kids, and they're thinking, okay, what am I putting in my body? Or when, God forbid, somebody's got cancer, or they're starting to think, okay, hey, why, how does why eat?
Yeah, damn you, Cheetos, you gave me cancer.
Something like that. So that it's the correlation. It's much easier to see that. You're like, hey, that tomato, that one had pesticides on it. That one didn't. I should maybe choose that one. Whereas in a restaurant, I think that's kind of lost in the overall experience.
For sure. Yeah, and a restaurant is typically selling atmosphere,
Exactly.
more than the food per se. Yeah, it's fascinating, especially because of everything being up for grabs right now with the pandemic, in that hospitality side of food. I've definitely just anecdotally through people that I know, and even some of our members and customers at StartWell, have been talking a lot about this idea of kind of a return to cooking, right? And I'm like, okay, Michael Pollan, guys, everyone, grow your own psychedelics in the backyard and then eat the non-psychedelic mushrooms with some butter from your friend's cow. But it hasn't happened. Like people might be cooking more. My friends and people that I know are not necessarily a representative segment of society, but they're a representatives, funnily enough, segment of professionals. They're all doctors and lawyers and stuff. And I'm like, I don't know enough entrepreneurs to talk to at dinner time. It's crazy. Anyway, that's a side note. That's a brain fart. But going to other people's houses who essentially have 9-to-5 lives, and they're very regular with their grocery shopping, and their fridge is typically always the same. Maybe the odd dragon fruit to appease a whimsical child's interest in the store, and then a quick Google search as to how to cut dragon fruit, and then it's on the table. But the experimentation in cooking, I guess, is what I'm getting at. I haven't seen, No. And the way I look at it is I love my house, and it could be any house that I live in.
Right.
But when I go home, I'm like, I'm going to do stuff here, right? I cook like crazy, and I make all sorts of stuff. And the kitchen is the greatest thing in the world because you get to open things and smell things and taste things and throw them together and experiment. And there's fire, there's wine, and there's fire. It's fun,
Well, no, it is. And I think, I think hopefully we've regained a bit of that. But the other part of it, it's interesting. I'm the same as you. I love cooking. I love roping the kids into it and making them peel garlic and stuff like that. And they won't admit it, but they have a great time.
Yeah.
There's a privilege as well to that, right? A privilege in terms of time, ingredients, knowledge, infrastructure. Obviously you need to have a certain number of things to be able to cook. I'm cognizant of that, right? There's serious time poverty, and one of the reasons why people don't cook is it's hard to keep for people who are trying to live on a budget. Fresh food goes bad obviously, and that's what ultimately we often cook with. So for them, it's often makes easier to get the TV dinner or to get takeout or something like that they can consume right away, rather than something that might go bad in the fridge if they don't get to it or something like that. That's what at least studies are showing, that a lot of
I get it, but I think that's a half thought, for those people.
Yes, yeah. If they push themselves, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, and I think on the meta, again, food education is really problematic. Like, I think this is should be a number one thing in school systems, is cooking should be part of the curriculum.
Yes, I agree.
Every child should know how to cook for themselves. How do you not know how to nourish yourself? I would say that about 6, 7 out of 10 people that I meet don't cook.
It's interesting. It actually speaks to what is a society we want to privilege and what we want to prioritize. So you say we should learn how to cook. Should we learn how to sew? Should we learn how to woodwork? Mm-hmm. Should we learn how to any number of things that we could theoretically do ourselves, but that we typically outsource? And I would argue, and I think it sounds like you agree, that their food is different than some of these other things. Like, I don't know if my kid needs to know how to knit a scarf, but they should know how to cook, because that goes into their body, and they should have some autonomy over how they make their food and not just rely on somebody else to be making it.
Yeah. And defining taste around what you can do for yourself will empower your ability to buy the best.
Yeah, exactly.
Wherever you go, and have a good time eating as well.
I'm with you, brother.
Awesome. Well, it was wicked talking nebulously, as you would say, about so many things.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's been awesome.
Absolutely a pleasure.